The most dangerous hearts are never the ones that threaten you, but the ones that quietly change everything you believed. The morning fog still lingered over the sprawling Blackwood estate as Naomi Brooks stepped through the towering iron gates with nothing more than a small suitcase and a folded employment letter clutched tightly in her hands. She had traveled nearly 600 miles from a quiet Georgia town to accept a housekeeping position that most people whispered about, but few truly understood. The mansion stood like a forgotten castle overlooking the city skyline, elegant yet intimidating, surrounded by perfectly trimmed gardens and centuries-old oak trees that seemed to guard every secret hidden behind its walls. Naomi paused for only a second before taking a slow breath. She had promised herself that this job was not just another paycheck. It was the beginning of a new life. Inside the mansion, everything sparkled with impossible perfection. Marble floors reflected the morning sunlight while crystal chandeliers illuminated halls lined with priceless paintings. Every employee moved with quiet precision, as if each footstep had already been rehearsed. Naomi immediately noticed the unspoken rule that no one dared mention the owner by his first name. They simply called him Mr. Blackwood, speaking with equal parts respect and caution. She wondered how one man could command such silence without even being present. Her supervisor quickly explained the daily routine, reminding every employee that professionalism mattered above all else. Naomi listened carefully, memorizing every instruction while offering polite smiles that immediately earned her quiet appreciation from several longtime staff members. Unlike many newcomers, she treated everyone with the same kindness, from the elderly gardener trimming roses outside to the young kitchen assistant nervously carrying trays through the dining hall. Before lunchtime, Naomi noticed an elderly housekeeper struggling to lift a heavy storage box onto a high shelf. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, carefully taking the weight from the woman's hands with a warm smile. The older woman thanked her repeatedly, surprised that someone on their very first day would stop to help without expecting anything in return. Naomi simply shrugged and replied that kindness never made anyone late enough to matter. Unbeknownst to her, someone had witnessed the entire exchange. Standing quietly on the second-floor balcony overlooking the grand entrance hall was Adrian Blackwood. Dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, he remained completely still, his sharp blue eyes following every movement below. Employees rarely looked up because they knew better than to interrupt his thoughts, yet Adrian did not leave when his assistant gently reminded him about an important afternoon meeting. Instead, he continued watching the young woman who had somehow ignored the invisible pressure that surrounded his home. She did not appear impressed by wealth. She did not seem frightened by status. She simply acted according to her heart. That alone was unusual. Moments later, Naomi accidentally dropped a single white rose while arranging fresh flowers near the staircase. Before she could bend down, another hand reached it first. She slowly lifted her eyes and found herself face to face with Adrian Blackwood. Time seemed to pause as the enormous mansion fell strangely silent around them. He offered the flower without speaking, his expression unreadable, while Naomi accepted it with a quiet thank you and a sincere smile that held no fear, no admiration, and no expectation. Adrian gave the smallest nod before walking away without another word. Yet something about that brief encounter lingered far longer than either of them expected. As Naomi returned to her work, she never noticed Adrian glancing back one final time from the end of the hallway, silently questioning why. For the very first time in years, someone who knew nothing about his world had made the enormous mansion feel just a little less empty. The following morning settled over Blackwood Estate with a calm silence that disguised the constant rhythm of work inside its grand walls. Naomi Brooks quickly learned that every room carried its own routine, and every employee carried an invisible expectation. She moved carefully through the mansion with steady confidence, greeting everyone with the same genuine kindness that had already begun to earn quiet smiles from people who had forgotten what simple warmth felt like. The older housekeeper she had helped the day before insisted that Naomi take a short break for coffee, explaining that very few newcomers lasted long because they became overwhelmed by the pressure of working inside the estate. Naomi only smiled and replied that every place felt less intimidating once people treated each other with respect. Unknown to her, those words would travel much farther than she expected. Adrian Blackwood spent the morning reviewing business reports inside his private study, yet he found himself distracted by something unusually ordinary. His assistant presented schedules, financial updates, and invitations to exclusive events, but Adrian barely noticed them. Instead, he asked a single unexpected question. He wanted to know the name of the new housekeeper who had arrived the previous day. His assistant looked surprised because Adrian had never shown interest in any employee before. After receiving Naomi Brooks's name, Adrian quietly nodded and returned to his paperwork, although his attention remained elsewhere. Throughout the afternoon, fate seemed determined to place them within sight of one another without creating another direct conversation. Naomi carefully arranged fresh flowers in the library while Adrian crossed the hallway outside. She organized books in the family reading room just moments before he entered for a brief meeting. She polished the antique piano in the music room while distant footsteps echoed through the corridor, reminding her that the mysterious owner was always closer than she realized. Every encounter lasted only seconds, yet each one left Adrian noticing another detail about her. She hummed softly while working, always returned every object to its exact place, and thanked every employee who offered assistance no matter how small the gesture. Unlike many people who entered his world hoping to impress him, Naomi seemed completely unaware that he was observing her at all. During lunch, whispers quietly spread through the staff dining room. Several employees noticed that Mr. Blackwood had walked through areas of the mansion he rarely visited. Some jokingly claimed he was inspecting renovations, while others suspected important guests would soon arrive. Naomi paid little attention to the conversations, believing they were simply part of life inside such a large estate. Her focus remained on learning every responsibility perfectly because she refused to disappoint the people who had trusted her with this opportunity. Later that afternoon, heavy rain unexpectedly covered the grounds, forcing gardeners and maintenance workers to rush indoors. Naomi noticed an elderly groundskeeper struggling to gather several flower pots before the wind could damage them. Without hesitation, she placed her cleaning supplies aside and hurried outside despite the rain soaking her uniform. Together, they safely moved every plant beneath the covered terrace. By the time they finished, Naomi was completely drenched, laughing quietly as the older man thanked her again and again for refusing to leave him alone. Standing behind the tall windows overlooking the gardens, Adrian watched the entire scene in thoughtful silence. Wealth had surrounded him for most of his life, yet genuine compassion remained something he encountered only rarely. As Naomi stepped back inside, embarrassed by her rain-soaked appearance, she unexpectedly met Adrian once again near the entrance hall. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Adrian removed his tailored coat and calmly offered it to her, without changing his composed expression. Naomi hesitated before accepting it with sincere gratitude, promising she would return it after it had dried. Adrian simply replied that kindness deserved kindness before continuing down the hallway. Naomi stood quietly holding the warm coat, unable to explain why that simple gesture felt so different from ordinary courtesy, while Adrian walked away wondering why every passing hour seemed to make the mansion feel less like a fortress and more like a place where hope had quietly begun to return. The following week unfolded with an almost peaceful rhythm, yet something invisible had begun to change inside Blackwood Estate. Naomi Brooks settled naturally into her responsibilities, earning the trust of every employee through patience, respect, and quiet determination. She never hurried through conversations with the older staff members, always remembered everyone's name, and somehow found time to brighten every room she entered without realizing the effect she had on those around her. The mansion still carried its elegant silence, but laughter occasionally echoed through the servants' quarters again, something several long-time employees admitted they had not heard in years. Adrian Blackwood noticed every small change without asking a single question. During his morning walks through the estate, he found fresh flowers arranged differently in the entrance hall, each bouquet chosen with remarkable attention to color and season. The library, once perfectly organized but lifeless, suddenly felt welcoming because Naomi always left a warm reading lamp glowing beside the favorite chair overlooking the gardens. Even the grand dining room seemed less formal after she quietly suggested placing fresh herbs from the greenhouse along the center of the table instead of expensive imported decorations. None of these details appeared important individually. Yet together they transformed the atmosphere of a place Adrian had long considered nothing more than a carefully maintained residence. One quiet afternoon, Naomi carried a stack of freshly folded linens toward the upper floor when she noticed the door to the music room standing slightly open. Gentle piano notes drifted into the hallway, slow and thoughtful, carrying more emotion than performance. Curious but respectful, she paused only long enough to listen before continuing toward her duties. She never realized Adrian had seen her reflection in the polished piano moments earlier. Instead of feeling interrupted, he found himself wondering why her quiet presence brought an unexpected sense of calm. Later that evening, Naomi discovered an old family photograph resting crookedly on a hallway table while dusting nearby shelves. It showed a younger Adrian standing beside an elegant woman whose warm smile seemed capable of filling the enormous mansion with light. Believing it deserved better care, Naomi carefully cleaned the frame and returned it to its place with fresh white lilies arranged beside it. She asked no questions about the woman because she believed every family carried memories that deserved privacy. The next morning, Adrian stopped in front of the photograph before leaving for work. He immediately noticed the clean glass and the flowers. For several silent seconds, he simply stood there, remembering his late mother, who had always filled their home with lilies during the spring. No employee had touched that photograph in years because everyone assumed he preferred not to see it. Yet Naomi had approached it not from curiosity, but from simple kindness. That evening, Adrian found Naomi organizing books in the library once again. Instead of walking past as usual, he quietly asked whether she enjoyed reading. Slightly surprised by the unexpected conversation, Naomi smiled and admitted that books had always been her favorite escape because they allowed ordinary people to travel anywhere without leaving home. Adrian glanced across the towering shelves before selecting a well-worn classic novel. He placed it gently in her hands and explained that it had once belonged to his mother, who believed every meaningful story deserved to be shared instead of hidden away. Naomi accepted it carefully, promising she would treat it with great respect. Their conversation lasted barely a minute, yet for Adrian it felt strangely effortless. After he left, Naomi opened the cover and discovered a handwritten note inside that simply read, "Kindness always finds its way home." She softly smiled, unaware that those same words had quietly followed Adrian throughout his entire life. And for the first time in many years, he began to wonder whether his mother's belief had finally become true. Days slowly turned into weeks, and Blackwood Estate continued to change in ways that were impossible to measure, yet impossible to ignore. The employees greeted one another more warmly. Conversations lingered a little longer during shared meals, and even the endless halls no longer felt as cold as they once had. Naomi Brooks never realized that many of those quiet changes had begun with her. She simply believed that every person deserved kindness regardless of their position. Adrian Blackwood noticed the transformation every single day, although he never spoke about it. Instead, he found himself adjusting his schedule without conscious intention, choosing routes through the mansion that somehow crossed paths with Naomi. Sometimes their meetings lasted only a few seconds, exchanging nothing more than a smile or a polite greeting. Yet those brief moments became the calmest part of his increasingly demanding days. Not everyone welcomed those changes. Several influential business associates frequently visited the estate, bringing conversations filled with prestige, expectations, and carefully maintained appearances. During one afternoon gathering, Naomi quietly served tea inside the grand drawing room before excusing herself as professionally as always. She had barely stepped outside when she overheard a visitor speaking with quiet amusement. The guest commented that the new housekeeper seemed unusually comfortable around the owner and suggested that employees should remember their place inside such an extraordinary household. Naomi lowered her eyes, choosing not to respond. She simply continued walking, believing that silence often carried greater dignity than unnecessary arguments. Unknown to her, Adrian had heard every word. The conversation continued after Naomi disappeared down the hallway, but Adrian calmly interrupted before anyone could say more. With steady confidence, he reminded every guest that respect was not determined by wealth, occupation, or family name, but by character. The room fell completely silent. No one challenged his statement, yet everyone understood it had not been spoken by accident. Naomi never learned exactly what had happened because no employee mentioned the discussion afterward. She only noticed that the visitors became noticeably more courteous whenever they crossed her path. One quiet evening, while organizing books inside the library, Naomi accidentally discovered an old journal tucked between several forgotten volumes. Before opening it, she noticed Adrian entering the room. She immediately apologized, explaining that she had found it while dusting the shelves and had no intention of reading something personal. Adrian accepted the journal with a gentle smile that surprised even himself. Instead of leaving, he thanked her for respecting his privacy. It was the longest conversation they had shared so far. Naomi admitted that trust could disappear in a single careless moment, while respect often lasted a lifetime. Adrian looked at her thoughtfully, realizing that very few people in his world understood that difference anymore. As autumn slowly approached, the estate prepared for its annual charity dinner, an event attended by community leaders, local organizations, and longtime family friends. Every employee worked tirelessly to ensure everything appeared perfect. Naomi spent hours arranging flowers, decorating reception tables, and helping coordinate countless small details that many guests would never notice. Late that evening, after nearly everyone had finished for the day, Adrian quietly walked through the grand ballroom. He paused beside the elegant centerpieces Naomi had created using simple seasonal flowers instead of extravagant imported arrangements. Their beauty came not from luxury, but from sincerity. Adrian quietly remarked that the room had never looked more welcoming. Naomi smiled modestly and replied that people remembered how a place made them feel far longer than they remembered how expensive it looked. Adrian held her gaze for a brief moment before nodding in quiet agreement. As they stood beneath the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers, neither of them realized that the distance separating two completely different worlds had already become much smaller than either heart was prepared to admit. The annual charity dinner arrived with a quiet sense of anticipation that spread throughout Blackwood Estate long before the first guests appeared. Every hallway shimmered beneath soft golden lights. Fresh autumn flowers filled the grand ballroom with gentle color, and the entire staff moved with graceful precision. Naomi Brooks checked every final detail one last time before stepping back to admire the room. She did not see expensive decorations or elegant furniture. She saw the combined effort of dozens of people who had worked together to create something meaningful. As the first guests entered, smiles replaced nervous expressions, and the evening unfolded with remarkable ease. Adrian Blackwood welcomed every visitor with his usual confidence, yet his attention drifted more often than he cared to admit. While conversations surrounded him, he repeatedly found his eyes searching the room until they rested on Naomi, quietly ensuring every guest felt comfortable without drawing attention to herself. Her calm presence seemed to steady the atmosphere in a way no amount of wealth ever could. Midway through the evening, a young volunteer helping with the charity event accidentally spilled a tray of sparkling water near the entrance. The teenager immediately apologized, clearly embarrassed and expecting criticism. Before anyone else could react, Naomi gently reassured the volunteer that accidents happen to everyone. She quickly helped clean the floor while encouraging the young woman to smile instead of worrying. Several guests watched the scene unfold with quiet admiration. Adrian observed from across the ballroom, realizing that Naomi never chose kindness because someone might notice. She chose it because it reflected who she truly was. Later that evening, the charity auction concluded successfully, raising more support than anyone had expected. As the guests slowly departed, Adrian thanked every employee personally for their hard work. When he reached Naomi, he paused for a brief moment before expressing his appreciation for everything she had contributed, not only to the event, but also to the atmosphere of the estate itself. Naomi smiled with genuine humility and replied that a beautiful home was never created by one person alone. It was created by people who cared about one another. Her words lingered in Adrian's thoughts long after the ballroom had fallen quiet. The following morning, while organizing a seldom-used sitting room, Naomi discovered a small wooden music box tucked behind several old books. Unsure whether it belonged in storage, she carefully carried it to Adrian's private office. After a gentle knock, she entered only when invited. Adrian looked up from his desk, surprised to see the music box resting in her hands. The moment he recognized it, his expression softened in a way Naomi had never witnessed before. He explained that it had belonged to his mother and had disappeared years earlier during renovations. Naomi apologized for disturbing him, but Adrian quietly thanked her instead. He slowly wound the tiny key, allowing a familiar melody to fill the office with delicate notes that seemed to awaken treasured memories. After a thoughtful silence, Adrian shared something he had never discussed with anyone working at the estate. His mother believed that true strength was measured not by power or influence, but by the ability to remain kind when life encouraged bitterness. Since losing her, he had buried himself in responsibility until the mansion gradually became little more than a place to exist rather than a place to live. Naomi listened without interrupting, offering neither sympathy nor empty reassurance. She simply understood that some memories needed nothing more than a patient heart willing to receive them. Before leaving the office, she quietly placed the music box back on the bookshelf where it could easily be seen. Adrian watched her walk toward the door before gently thanking her once more. As the office became silent again, he realized that the walls surrounding his life had not begun to fall because someone demanded they should. They had begun to disappear because one ordinary woman had consistently chosen compassion over judgment. And for the first time in many years, Adrian found himself believing that even the deepest loneliness could eventually give way to hope. Several peaceful days passed after the discovery of the music box, yet an invisible change settled over Blackwood Estate. Adrian Blackwood no longer viewed the mansion as a collection of elegant rooms and endless responsibilities. Every hallway reminded him of conversations that had quietly restored forgotten memories, and every morning he found himself looking forward to the simple possibility of crossing paths with Naomi Brooks. Their exchanges remained brief and respectful, but an unspoken trust had begun to grow between them. Naomi noticed the difference as well. Adrian smiled more often, asked genuine questions about the staff instead of only discussing schedules, and occasionally lingered in the library after work simply to enjoy a few moments of silence. The estate itself seemed lighter, as though years of loneliness had slowly begun to fade. That fragile sense of peace changed one crisp autumn afternoon when an elegant woman arrived unexpectedly at the mansion. She introduced herself as Victoria Ashford, the daughter of one of the Blackwood family's oldest business partners. Her confidence immediately attracted attention, and several employees quietly whispered that she and Adrian had known each other for years. Naomi greeted the visitor politely before returning to her responsibilities, believing the arrival was nothing more than another important meeting. Throughout the afternoon, however, she repeatedly noticed Victoria walking beside Adrian through the estate while discussing upcoming charity projects and family obligations. Their conversations appeared comfortable and familiar, leaving Naomi with an unfamiliar feeling she could not quite explain. She reminded herself that Mr. Blackwood's personal life had nothing to do with her position, yet the thought lingered in her mind longer than she expected. Later that evening, while preparing fresh flowers for the main entrance, Naomi accidentally overheard two visiting guests speaking quietly near the staircase. One confidently assumed that Adrian and Victoria would eventually announce an engagement because such a partnership would satisfy many influential families. The words struck Naomi more deeply than she cared to admit. She did not question whether the rumor was true. Instead, she quietly finished arranging the flowers before excusing herself earlier than usual, convincing herself that maintaining professional distance was the wisest choice. Over the following days, Naomi became noticeably quieter. She continued performing every responsibility with the same dedication, yet she politely declined invitations to join the staff for coffee and avoided lingering in the library after completing her work. Adrian immediately sensed the difference. Their familiar conversations disappeared, replaced by brief greetings and careful formality. He could not understand what had changed, and every attempt to begin another conversation seemed to end before it truly started. For the first time since Naomi had arrived, the estate once again felt larger and strangely colder. Concerned by the growing distance, Adrian asked his longtime housekeeper whether something had happened. The older woman hesitated before gently mentioning the rumors spreading among visitors and employees. Adrian stood silently for several moments before realizing how easily quiet assumptions could create unnecessary pain. He had never viewed Victoria as anything more than a trusted family acquaintance, yet he had failed to recognize how those appearances might affect someone who knew only fragments of the truth. That evening, Adrian searched the gardens, hoping to find Naomi before she finished work. He eventually saw her standing beside the greenhouse, carefully watering the white lilies that reminded him of his mother. As he approached, Naomi offered her usual respectful smile, but it lacked the warmth that had once made every conversation effortless. Adrian wanted to explain everything immediately, yet the words refused to come easily. Instead, they stood together beneath the fading autumn sky in thoughtful silence. Naomi quietly wished him a pleasant evening before walking back toward the mansion. Adrian watched her disappear through the garden path, realizing with growing certainty that the one person who had quietly brought light back into his life was slowly beginning to walk away, and he finally understood that some distances could not be measured in miles, but only in moments left unspoken. The days that followed felt quieter than any season Naomi Brooks could remember. She continued fulfilling every responsibility with the same care and professionalism, yet she deliberately kept a respectful distance from Adrian Blackwood. She convinced herself that maintaining clear boundaries would protect both of them from expectations neither of them had chosen. Every polite greeting replaced conversations that had once come naturally, and although no one openly mentioned the change, the atmosphere inside Blackwood Estate slowly reflected the growing silence between them. Adrian refused to accept that silence as the final answer. After spending several sleepless evenings replaying every recent conversation in his mind, he realized that waiting for circumstances to change would only allow misunderstandings to grow stronger. One morning, he asked Victoria Ashford to join him for coffee in the sunroom overlooking the gardens. With calm honesty, he thanked her for years of friendship and support before gently explaining that the rumors surrounding them had never reflected reality. Victoria smiled with understanding rather than disappointment. She admitted she had noticed Adrian becoming someone very different since Naomi arrived at the estate. His voice carried more warmth. His decisions reflected greater compassion, and the mansion itself finally resembled the welcoming home his late mother had always dreamed of creating. She encouraged him not to allow assumptions to speak louder than truth. Before leaving the estate, Victoria intentionally thanked Naomi for her kindness during the charity event and warmly mentioned that she looked forward to introducing Adrian to the right person one day, adding with a playful smile that she clearly was not that person. Naomi was surprised by the unexpected conversation. As Victoria's car disappeared through the front gates, Naomi quietly realized how easily silence had allowed her imagination to create a story that had never existed. Even so, she still questioned whether someone like her truly belonged in Adrian's world. Later that afternoon, the estate hosted a small appreciation luncheon for local volunteers who had participated in the recent charity event. Adrian chose to spend less time speaking with influential guests and more time personally thanking every volunteer and employee. Several longtime business associates privately questioned why the owner of Blackwood Estate devoted so much attention to staff members instead of expanding professional connections. Adrian answered without hesitation. He explained that successful organizations were built by people who cared for one another, not by impressive titles alone. Naomi overheard his response while arranging refreshments nearby. For the first time in many days, she looked toward Adrian and saw complete sincerity in his expression. There was no performance, no attempt to impress anyone, only quiet conviction. That evening, as the sun settled behind the rolling hills beyond the estate, Adrian found Naomi tending the white lilies beside the greenhouse once again. This time he did not hesitate. He apologized for allowing misunderstandings to remain unanswered and admitted that he had spent much of his life believing responsibility required emotional distance. Meeting Naomi had slowly challenged everything he believed about strength, leadership, and home. Naomi listened carefully before softly admitting that she had allowed fear to make decisions her heart should have questioned first. She explained that she never wanted to become the reason people whispered about him or doubted his judgment. Adrian gently smiled and replied that people would always find reasons to whisper, but only a few people entered another person's life with enough kindness to change it forever. Naomi lowered her eyes, touched by the quiet honesty in his words. They stood together beneath the evening sky, surrounded by blooming lilies and gentle autumn air, saying very little because no long conversation was necessary. The walls built by misunderstanding had quietly begun to disappear, replaced by something far stronger than certainty. It was trust, patiently earned one thoughtful moment at a time, and both of them sensed that the path ahead would no longer be walked alone. As autumn slowly gave way to the first signs of winter, Blackwood Estate felt transformed in ways that no renovation or celebration could ever accomplish. Warm lights filled windows that had once remained dark. Conversations drifted through hallways that had previously echoed with silence, and every member of the household sensed that something hopeful had quietly taken root. Naomi Brooks and Adrian Blackwood returned to their familiar routines, yet nothing about those routines felt ordinary anymore. Their conversations remained respectful and unhurried, built upon trust instead of uncertainty. They no longer searched for reasons to avoid one another, nor did they need grand declarations to understand what had changed between them. Their connection revealed itself through countless ordinary moments that gradually became extraordinary. One snowy morning, Adrian invited several local families to the estate for a holiday charity gathering organized in memory of his late mother. Unlike previous years, he insisted that every guest be welcomed as though they were entering a family home rather than attending a formal event. Naomi worked beside the staff from sunrise until the first visitors arrived, carefully arranging handmade decorations created by children from nearby community centers instead of expensive ornaments. The grand ballroom radiated warmth, not because of luxury, but because every detail reflected genuine care. Throughout the celebration, Adrian quietly watched Naomi kneel beside nervous children, helping them decorate gingerbread cookies and encouraging shy smiles with patient kindness. Parents thanked her repeatedly, unaware that Adrian found himself smiling simply by watching those moments unfold. Near the end of the afternoon, an elderly woman approached Adrian with gentle curiosity. She explained that she had known his mother many years ago and quietly remarked that she had not seen genuine happiness in his eyes since he was a young man. She glanced toward Naomi across the room before softly adding that some people arrived in life carrying wealth, while others arrived carrying peace. Adrian looked toward Naomi without answering, knowing the elderly woman had already spoken the truth his own heart had slowly accepted. That evening, after the final guests departed and the last decorations were carefully stored away, Adrian and Naomi walked through the peaceful gardens where a light blanket of snow covered every path. The white lilies had long disappeared beneath the season, yet their empty flower beds reminded Adrian that every winter quietly prepared the earth for another spring. He stopped beside the greenhouse and thanked Naomi for changing far more than the atmosphere of the estate. He admitted that before meeting her, he had measured success by accomplishments, responsibilities, and expectations. She had patiently shown him that a meaningful life was measured instead by compassion, trust, and the people willing to remain beside you even when nothing required them to stay. Naomi listened with quiet emotion before gently confessing that she had arrived believing she would simply earn a living and eventually move on. Instead, she had discovered a place where she felt respected, valued, and understood for the first time in many years. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and carefully removed the small handwritten note that had once rested inside his mother's favorite novel. He unfolded the worn paper before reading the familiar words aloud once again. Kindness always finds its way home. He smiled before placing the note into Naomi's hands, explaining that his mother had always believed it belonged to the person who truly understood its meaning. Naomi accepted it with quiet gratitude, realizing the gift represented far more than a treasured memory. It was a symbol of trust passed from one generation to another. As snowflakes drifted gently around them beneath the peaceful evening sky, both of them understood that the greatest secret neither had been searching for was not hidden inside the mansion, the family legacy, or the past. It had quietly been growing within two hearts willing to choose kindness every single day. And together they stepped back toward the warmly glowing estate, knowing that the future waiting beyond its doors would finally feel like home. Winter gradually surrendered to the first gentle days of spring, and Blackwood Estate awakened with quiet beauty that seemed to mirror the journey its residents had taken together. Fresh blossoms appeared throughout the gardens, sunlight lingered longer across the stone pathways, and the mansion that had once felt distant now carried the warmth of shared laughter and meaningful conversations. Naomi Brooks continued serving the estate with the same humility that had first brought life back into its halls, but she no longer walked through the mansion wondering whether she truly belonged there. She had become an irreplaceable part of its story, not because of her position, but because of the kindness she had offered without ever expecting anything in return. Adrian Blackwood often reflected on how unexpectedly everything had changed. He still carried the responsibilities that came with leading his family's business and preserving generations of tradition, yet those responsibilities no longer defined his entire existence. Naomi had quietly taught him that success without compassion created only empty achievements, while genuine relationships gave every accomplishment lasting meaning. Together, they continued expanding the charitable work his mother had once cherished, opening the estate several times each season to support local families, students, and community organizations. Employees who had spent decades working within the mansion often remarked that they had never witnessed such unity among the household. Every celebration felt more personal, every shared meal carried genuine laughter, and every visitor commented that Blackwood Estate possessed an atmosphere unlike any other grand home they had ever entered. One bright afternoon, Adrian invited every employee to gather in the garden where the white lilies had returned in full bloom. Standing beneath the same trees where countless quiet conversations had changed both of their lives, he thanked each member of the household for helping transform the estate into a true home once again. Then he turned toward Naomi with calm confidence and admitted before everyone present that the greatest gift the estate had received was not a successful business year, a restored family legacy, or another beautiful season. The greatest gift had arrived on the day an ordinary young woman chose kindness in a place that had forgotten how to welcome it. Silence settled gently across the garden before warm smiles spread among every face. The longtime housekeeper quietly wiped away joyful tears, remembering the lonely young man Adrian had once been and recognizing the peaceful leader standing before her now. Naomi felt overwhelmed by emotion, yet she answered with the same sincerity that had guided her from the beginning. She reminded everyone that no single person could change a home alone. A home changed because people chose every day to treat one another with dignity, patience, forgiveness, and hope. Adrian stepped closer before gently taking her hand, not as a grand performance, but as the simplest expression of truth. There were no dramatic promises, no extravagant speeches, and no need for unnecessary words. Every person gathered already understood what had quietly grown between them through countless ordinary moments. Above them, a soft spring breeze carried the fragrance of blooming lilies across the estate. Adrian smiled as he looked toward the restored gardens, remembering his mother's handwritten message that had guided him back to the life he thought he had lost. Kindness always finds its way home. Looking into Naomi's eyes, he realized those words had never been merely a comforting belief. They had become the story of their lives. Together they walked through the open garden gates toward the mansion filled with light, grateful that the journey had not been shaped by power, wealth, or circumstance, but by quiet compassion patiently shared one day at a time. And as the doors of Blackwood Estate welcomed them once more, the place that had once been defined by silence finally became exactly what both of them had been searching for all along, a home where love was discovered not through grand destiny, but through simple kindness that never stopped choosing another heart.